like to welcome you to the Norma Explores podcast. We're on a slow travel journey around rural Britain, seeking out local history, folklore, and curious characters. In this episode, we head to Dorset, where Little Bear visits another execution site, and then we find our way to Norfolk, to an article which featured in the very first issue of our Norma Explores magazine. Silver, or Little Bear as he is often known, is a rescue bear. We found him in a pile of discarded books at a recycling bank. He was grubby and feral and not at all trusting of humans. We took him home and gave him a bath. He wasn't keen, to be honest, but he must have felt better for it. He started coming on our adventures with us, and soon he was picking out places he wanted to visit himself. He's a macabre little bear, and always wants to visit haunted houses or sites of great battles, and also loves true crime. You can guarantee that if he wants to visit somewhere, something grim probably happened there. A few months ago, in a rare half-day of late May sunshine, Little Bear took me on a historical walk around the Wareham Walls. These Anglo-Saxon earthworks are some of the best examples to be found, and introduces us to the long history of a once important Dorset town. We have visited Wareham before, and regular readers of our newsletter and magazine, both available on Ko-fi and Patreon, may recall our visit to the Saxon church there. The history of the walls, however, is somewhat more bloody, so we can already guess why our grim little bear took an interest in them. In the late 9th century, this port town was subjected to an attack in Viking raids under Prince Guthrum. It took several months for King Alfred to retake the town, and this led to the realization that permanent defences would be needed to deter future attempts to capture it. King Alfred created a burh town, which were one of the earliest groups of planned medieval towns in Western Europe. Wessex would have over 30 of these fortified centres in the early 900s. Most have since lost their protective walls, but not Wareham. They are now protected as a scheduled ancient monument. At one time they would have been reinforced, eventually topped with massive stone walls. None of this survives today, but the sheer height of the earthworks is still impressive. A footpath runs along the top of them, and there are helpful information boards along the route. Walking the walls, which curtain 3 sides of the town, can be done in under an hour. The section of the walls that Little Bear was most interested to see is the section called Bloody Bank, unsurprisingly. This is the area where town executions had taken place. The 13th century saw a hermit, known as Peter of Pontefract, hanged on the walls along with his son. The Yorkshire-born hermit prophesied that King John's crown would pass to other hands before Ascension Day in the year 1213. The hermit had gained a popular following, and as this was a threat to the king, he was arrested. He was taken from his town and transported to be held at Corfe Castle in Dorset. The king took steps to secure his position, and when Ascension Day came and went, he then had to decide what to do with the seer who had caused such a sensation. King John, being something of a less than chill dude, decided to make an example of Peter of Pontefract. The hermit and his son were taken from the castle and each tied to a horse's tail. Also not cool, John. They were dragged from Corfe Castle to Wareham, where they were hanged on the Wareham Walls. The next notable use of the walls as an execution site came in 1685. The son of King Charles II, the Duke of Monmouth, had risen up in protest at his uncle's ascension to the throne. While the Duke of Monmouth was said to be illegitimate, he was popular, and so many ordinary folk preferred the idea of this charming and enthusiastic young man as monarch over the unpopular, Catholic, and fairly useless King James II. Unfortunately for Monmouth, 1,300 of his supporters would be killed at the Battle of Sedgemoor on the 6th of June 1685, and another 2,700 captured. The rebellion had failed, and the bloodiest part of the story would begin. Those supporters that were captured would be tried in the bloody assizes under a thoroughly ruthless Judge Jeffreys. 320 were sentenced to death, 6 of which were hanged, drawn and quartered, here on the bloody bank. After execution, their heads were displayed at the crossroads, and their quartered parts displayed on the South Bridge. Mention of the bloody assizes and Judge Jeffreys pop up across Dorset, so look out for this on your own historical adventures. With the bloody bank now behind us, it's worth noting that the rest of the walk is a little less traumatic, and it is worth choosing a lovely afternoon to go and walk the rest of the walls, as there are information boards posted along its length, and you can learn much more about them as you go. With Little Bear tired out from another grim adventure, he went back to his bear cave. He wanted a story before bed, so we went back through the archives for an article from our first ever magazine issue, a visit to the village of Wiveton in Norfolk. It's easy to miss Wiveton, at least it was for me. The first time I saw it was just passing through, skirting the village green and heading off towards Clyde next the sea. I had actually visited the church a couple of times before I realised there was, in fact, a whole other part to the village. You see, if you stand on the village green, all you see is the church to one side and the village pub, the Wiveton Bell, on the other. You have to follow a little lane by the side of the pub to find the houses, and I'd never had a reason to go that way. It's actually a pretty village of mainly 18th and 19th century cottages, but that's not what I'm talking about today. In medieval times, Wiveton was an important seaport, but today only a couple of medieval structures still stand, and this is where I'm taking you now. I'm starting this little historical visit to Wiveton at the bridge, which sits just outside the village. You can find it marked on old maps as Medieval Bridge, in that wonderful Gothic font that tells you something interesting awaits. This is what caused me to go and take a further look after that first time zipping through the village. From the viewpoint of the road, it's fairly unassuming, narrow and easy to overlook when passing over it by vehicle. Seen from the surrounding countryside, however, it's easy to appreciate the modest sturdiness of a structure that's been there for 500 years. Built in around 1500, its most curious feature is that of a possible chapel on its southwest corner. A chapel was noted here at the same site in the 1480s, and perhaps stood adjacent to an earlier bridge or ford before being incorporated into the stone bridge we see today. Small single-room chapels were sometimes built alongside rivers and watercourses. It's possible they allowed fishermen and workers on the waterways to offer prayer or give thanks before or after a day's work. I have seen one other suspected river chapel previously, which was a very modest affair. The bridge is a scheduled ancient monument. It, along with the parish church of St Mary's, are the only remaining structures of medieval-era Wiveton. We'll make our way up to the church next. The church, as seen today, is almost all the result of a 15th century rebuild, though traces of the original building can still be found in the lower parts of the tower. It's not the church, but one of its rectors I find most interesting, however. So I'm taking you to the 18th century. The rector in question is a man called James Hackman. He was born in 1752 in Hampshire. At the age of 20, he was purchased a commission as an ensign in the 68th Regiment of Foot, and was eventually promoted to lieutenant. Although his father had served in the Royal Navy, the armed forces did not suit James as a career, and after only 5 years he resigned in favour of becoming a cleric. As it turned out, this didn't much suit him either. In March of 1779 he was made rector of Wiveton, a place it's very possible he had never even visited. Sadly, by this time he was already a troubled young man. Several years earlier, while still a serving officer in the army, he had visited the home of Lord Sandwich, he of the filled bread fame. While there, he met Martha Ray. Martha had lived with Lord Sandwich as his wife since her late teens. The Lord's actual wife had been previously declared mad and confined to an apartment in Windsor Castle. During this and subsequent visits, James and Martha became close. Although the extent of their relationship is debated, for James's part he was besotted with her. Unfortunately for him, he was posted to Ireland soon after, and they were unable to spend more time together. And this is where it all goes horribly wrong, I'm afraid. He left the army and embarked on his career as a cleric. A little over a month after becoming the new rector at Wiveton, James took the decision to go to London in search of Martha. He suspected her of taking a new lover, and unable to accept that he was no longer in her life, wanted to confront her. Martha had indeed gone to London. On the night in question, she was going to watch an opera at Covent Garden with a female companion. Sadly, while there she was spotted in the company of a gentleman, and this seemed to be all the evidence needed for James to make his decision. In a fit of jealousy, he fetched, or was more likely already carrying, a pair of pistols. He waited near the famous Bedford Coffee House close by the Opera House. He saw Martha and her companions exit and made for their carriage. He walked up to Martha and shot her in the head. With the second pistol, he attempted to kill himself. He was unsuccessful in killing himself, but Martha had died instantly. Having only a flesh wound, he was detained and arrested. 9 days later, he was tried for her murder at the Old Bailey. His defence argued that his only intention was to kill himself and have Martha as witness. However, seeing her in the company of a gentleman was too much, and it drove him to the insane act of murder in that moment. He was found guilty. On the 19th of April 1779, James Hackman was executed for the murder of Martha Ray at Tyburn, London. It is still debated as to whether he was driven insane due to unrequited love, or was just unable to control his jealousy over finding her in the company of another gentleman. It is argued that the taking of 2 loaded pistols that day indicated his intention that there be 2 deaths, but we will never know. With James Hackman's story now concluded, we'll turn our back on the church and face the green. Sitting upon it, you will see an unusual monument. Standing upright, its base buried in the ground, is a Napoleonic-era cannon. There are variations in the story of how it came to be here, but the most popular is this. It is said that the cannon was being transported in a convoy from King's Lynn to Felixstowe. Along the way, its carriage collapsed, and the cannon was lost in the wayside scrub. It was left behind and lay undisturbed for some time before being rediscovered by locals at a later date. Now, these locals thought it would be a great idea to try and fire the thing. Unfortunately, they didn't have shot of the right size, so when they tried to fire it, the cannonball got stuck and the resulting pressure blew out a hole in the side of the cannon. It was again abandoned, but was afterward recovered and mounted as a curiosity on the village green. It's a fun tale, though my main issue with the legend is the overly scenic route they seem to be taking in order to pass through Wiveton to get to Felixstowe. Personally, I think the cannon is more likely to have been purchased as a souvenir, though the part about the misguided attempt to fire it is entirely possible. The canon also features in my side project, the Jivar Archive, as my grandfather also visited here and photographed it in 1978. If you'd like to see the original photograph and learn more about what the Jivar Archive is, then feel free to nip over to Norma Explores website and pick up the link at the top of the page there. Moving on from the canon and the Napoleonic Wars, we now move forward into the Great War, and yes, I'm taking you back into the churchyard of St. Mary's. I want to introduce you to a sailmaker's mate of the Royal Navy, Mr. William Whisker. William was born in Wiveton on October the 15th, 1881, and grew up in the village. He worked as a farm lad before joining the Royal Navy as an 18-year-old in 1899. It was not an illustrious career, and as he progressed to become a sailmaker's mate on board HMS Pembroke, he became dependent on alcohol. His service record shows several occasions spent in the cells for days at a time. I don't know for sure, but it's likely these were directly related to or as a result of his drinking. One of my favourite things to discover while researching his life was also found on his service record. Under the section Wounds, Scars, Marks, etc., it noted tattoo, generally on both arms, bee on chest, butterflies on feet, which brought him to life a little more in the absence of photographs. He served throughout the First World War, but on the 21st of January 1921, he died at the Royal Navy Hospital, Chatham. His cause of death was given as delirium tremens. He was just 39 years old. Delirium tremens is the most severe form of alcohol withdrawal. The condition can occur after an abrupt cessation of alcohol in those with chronic use. It commonly affects those who have used alcohol heavily over a long period of time. He was given a Commonwealth War Grave Commission headstone and is buried in the southeast corner of the churchyard. The last leg of this historical amble around Wiveton brings us from one World War to another. I'm going to end by pointing out two relics of the Second World War and the Home Guard in the village. There's not a lot to see, but for those of us with an interest, it's worth noting. Just outside the church, near the entrance, is a spigot mortar pedestal. The Blacker Bombard, or 29mm spigot mortar, was an infantry anti-tank weapon intended for use by the Home Guard, though used also by the wider army. Installed between 1941 and 42, there are many of these bases still to be found in the country. They usually consist of a concrete base with a polished metal rod in the middle. Walking in the footsteps of the Home Guard, I'll take you back to where we started, Wiveton's medieval bridge. If you stand on the bridge and cast your eye inland, you will see the last thing I'm going to point out. There, to the right, and quite covered by foliage, is a World War II Type 24 pillbox. Built in 1940, it is one of around 28,000 pillboxes and field fortifications built as the country prepared for possible invasion by Germany. Of these, more than 6,000 remain today. If you've enjoyed this supplement to the Norma Explores world and would like more, this newsletter and our magazine are available as PDF downloads via our website at www.normaexplores.com. To support us further and enjoy exclusive members' content, please come and join our Patreon via www.patreon.com/NormaExplores714. That'll keep the project going and we'll continue to bring you more history to enjoy into the future.